Paper Vows, Episode 7, Clause 4. Written by Mia. I carried what I'd found in the visitor book around for 4 days like a stone in my coat, and it changed the weight of everything. I didn't confront him. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, but the truth was smaller and more cowardly than that. I was afraid, not of Adrian, of the answer. Because there were two versions of the man I was falling for, and they lived one inside the other like a painting under a painting, and I didn't yet know which one I'd find when I cleaned the surface away. In one, a lonely boy never forgot the woman who gave him the good biscuits, and grew up and came back to keep her last light burning, and loved her daughter almost against his will. In the other, a man whose family fortune was built partly on drowning small beautiful things came to the daughter of one of them carrying guilt dressed up as rescue and married her so the books would balance. Same facts, same biscuits. Two completely different men, and I was living with both of them, and one of them I would forgive anything and the other I would never forgive at all. I tried, those 4 days, to find out which one he was. I am a restorer. I know how to read a surface for what's hiding underneath. I looked up Vale Capital's holdings in the district late at night on my phone in the studio and found exactly the thing I feared, and not nearly enough of it. Yes, they'd bought up the street. Yes, the dates lined up with my mother's worst years. But ownership is an intention, and a company is not a man. And a 9-year-old who counted biscuits is not answerable for what his father's empire did while he was in the back room learning to read brushwork. I went round and round it. I'd watch Adrian across the breakfast table buttering Pip's toast into the shape of a cat because she'd asked him to, and think, not him, it cannot be him, and then I'd remember the statement, and the way he'd said you'll never forgive me, and the stone would shift in my code, and I'd know nothing at all except that I was far too deep to be objective, which is the one condition under which a restorer must never, ever work. Adrian noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "You've gone quiet," he said on the 4th evening, finding me in the studio not painting in front of a canvas I'd been not painting for an hour. "Properly quiet. You're never quiet. It's like the heating's gone off in the house." He stood in the doorway, careful, reading me. "Did Marcus contact you again? Tell me if he did."
No.
"Then what?" "Tell me about the biscuits. I didn't say. Tell me whether I'm the rescue or the apology." "Just tired," I said, which was the first lie I'd ever told him, and we both heard it land wrong, and he didn't push, and the not pushing was its own kind of tenderness, and I hated that too, because tenderness from a man who might be your mother's undoing is the cruelest possible thing. He came and stood behind me at the canvas, not touching, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, and looked at the painting I hadn't been painting, a small commission, a child's portrait worked up from a photograph, a little girl who died old and was being remembered young. "You've been on this one a while," he said quietly. "It's hard," I said. "Restoring the dead. You have to decide how much to fix, whether to keep the crack, because the crack is part of how it survived, or smooth it away and pretend the surviving never cost anything." I felt him go still behind me. "And which do you do?" he asked, and his voice had changed, and I understood we'd stopped talking about the painting. "Depends," I said, "on whether the thing can bear to be seen as it really is. Some things would rather stay a little broken than be looked at too closely." The silence behind me stretched very long. "Yes," he said at last, almost too quiet to hear. "Some things would." And he left, and I stood there knowing I'd been handed the opening to ask and had let it pass again, and despising my own cowardice. It might have gone on like that. Two people circling a thing neither would name, the contract holding by its fingernails. But that night Pip had a nightmare, And the nightmare broke everything open, the way children break things open without meaning to, just by being small and honest in the dark. I heard her first. I'd started sleeping lighter since she came, tuned to her the way you tune to a thing you've decided to keep. A thin sound down the hall, and then a wail. The particular wail of a child surfacing from a dream into a worse waking, and I was up and moving before I decided to be, and Adrian's door opened the same instant down the west corridor, and we reached her room together, the two of us, the way we did everything now. She was sitting up, rigid, eyes open and unseeing, crying for her mother. Not the woman down the hall. Her mother. The real one. The lost one. Surfacing in the dark the way grief does when the daytime defenses come down. I had read about night terrors. I had not been ready for the sound of one, for how a child who has lost everything sounds at 2 a.m. when the loss comes back fresh, as it does, over and over, grief not being a thing you finish, but a tide that keeps coming in. For a moment Adrian and I both just stood there, two competent adults rendered completely useless by 3 feet of weeping child, and I saw on his face the exact terror he'd confessed the first day. I don't know how to not fail her. And I understood that this, right here, was the test that actually mattered. Not the trust, not Marcus, not the courts, but this dark room and this small, unsolvable grief, and whether two people who'd signed a paper promising to feel nothing could become, in the space of a wail, the kind of people a frightened child could safely fall apart in front of. She was here, Pip sobbed. She was here, and then she went and I couldn't make her stay. And Adrian, who did not know how to do this, who had told me on the first day he didn't know how to not fail her, crossed the room and gathered his brother's child into his arms without a flicker of hesitation, all his careful control spent entirely on being a wall she could break against. "I've got you," he said, rough into her hair. "I've got you, Pip. You're safe. We're here. You'll go too." She said it into his shoulder, muffled, devastating, the secret terror of every child who's learned that people leave. And then, lifting her wet face, finding me in the dark doorway, she said the thing that ended me. "Esme's going to go." I heard the man on the phone say it's only for a year. I heard. Her small face crumpled. "Everybody only stays for a year. Promise you won't. Promise me. Promise." And there it was, the contract, in the mouth of a 7-year-old at 2 a.m. It's only for a year. She'd heard. Of course she'd heard. Children always hear the one thing you'd give your life for them not to. I came and knelt by the bed, and Adrian looked at me over her head, and his face was open and wrecked, and asking me a question I didn't have the right to answer, because the honest answer was in a drawer upstairs in clean, dull legal English, and the honest answer was yes, sweetheart, I signed a paper that says I leave. I didn't give her the honest answer. I gave her the true one, which is a different thing. "I'm not going anywhere I don't have to," I said, and took her hot little hand and Adrian's cold one, and held them both the way I had in the car, the way my mother held the hands of strangers who came and lost. And I'm going to fight like absolute hell to not have to. That's a promise I can actually keep, Pip, so it's the one I'll make you. Not I'll never go. I'm not going to lie to you. You've had enough of people who lie. I'll fight to stay, with everything I've got. Do you understand the difference? She looked at me for a long time with her mother's grief in her face. "That's a better promise," she said finally, with the terrible wisdom of the young. Mum used to say the true ones sound smaller. "Your mum," I said, when I could speak, sounds like she was exactly right. We got her back to sleep eventually, the two of us, one on each side. The broken song hummed low until her breathing went deep and even, and her grip loosened. And then we stood in the dark hall outside her door. Adrian and I rung out 2 a.m, and the contract was in pieces on the floor between us, and we both knew it. "I'll fight to stay," he repeated, very quietly. "You meant that." "You know I did." "Esme." He turned to me, and the wall wasn't just down, it was rubble. It was gone. There was nothing left of the man who'd read me clause for like a fire safety notice. "I can't keep doing this. I can't stand in dark halls one more time being noble about a thing I wrote that clause to protect you from me, and tonight a 7-year-old just dismantled it with one sentence, and I'm so tired of being protected from the only good thing that's happened to me in 20 years. "Then stop," I whispered. "Stop being noble. I'm begging you, just for tonight, be a person who wants something." For a heartbeat he didn't move, and I watched the war in him. 20 years of careful, the clause, the secret, the iron certainty that he was the wrong man for this, and I watched a braver thing win. The thing my mother had spotted in a lonely 9-year-old and fed with biscuits. The thing that had somehow survived all the glass and all the cold. A person who underneath everything only wanted to be allowed to love and be loved out loud, like anyone. "Esme," he said once more, my name like a weight set finally down. "If I do this, I won't be able to undo it. I've never not been able to undo something." "I know," I said. "That's the entire point. Welcome to the rest of us." And Adrian Vale, who acquired things and never wanted them, who had folded himself away behind glass and contracts and disguised courgettes, finally stopped being careful and crossed the small dark distance between us and kissed me like a man coming up out of cold water after far too long under it. And I kissed him back with 4 days of stone in my coat, and 4 weeks of forks and plates and pianos, and everything I'd sworn the contract would keep me safe from, and the clause didn't break so much as dissolve. Gone, irrelevant, a thing 2 frightened people had hidden behind until a braver child than either of them tore it down. I won't tell you all of it. Some provenance you keep. But I'll tell you that he kissed me like an apology, and I kissed him like a beginning, and that we did not, in the end, go back to our separate wings, and that for the first time the glass house felt like the warmest room in the city, the room my mother would have understood, full of 2 people loving something out loud at last. After, in the dark, his heart slowing under my hand, I almost told him I knew. About the biscuits. The boy who came 11 times. I had it right there, the whole tender, terrible question. I found you in her visitor book, tell me the rest, and I opened my mouth to ask it, because you cannot fully give yourself to a man with a stone still in your coat. I propped myself up to see his face in the gray beginning of dawn. He looked younger without the careful on him, the wall finally off duty, and I loved him. There it was, plainly, no contract word games left in me. I loved this difficult glass man who buttered toast into cats and played bad piano on purpose, and had once been a hungry boy in my mother's back room. And loving him was exactly why I had to ask, because love without provenance is only a beautiful forgery, and I had spent my whole life refusing to traffic in those. I drew the breath to ask him about the biscuits. He spoke first. "There's something I have to tell you." His voice was different in the dark, younger, frightened. "About your mother, about the gallery and my family and why I really came. I should have told you before tonight. It isn't a small thing, Esme, and you're not going to," he stopped, breathed. "But you deserve all of it before this goes any further. So tomorrow, in daylight, where you can leave the room if you need to. Tomorrow I'll tell you everything, and then you'll decide what tonight was, and I'll abide by it, whatever you decide. Adrian." "Promise me you'll let me tell you myself," he said, with a strange urgency. "However you find out it's coming, whatever Marcus does, whoever calls, let me be the one to tell you. Promise me that." And I promised, lying in the warm dark with the man I'd fallen for against every term of a contract I'd signed in good faith, not knowing that the promise was already broken before I made it, that the call was already coming, that Marcus Vale did not wait for daylight, and that I would learn the whole of my husband's provenance, not gently in the morning, from his own mouth, but at 9 the next morning, in the cold marble offices of the family trust, in front of 11 people in good suits, in the worst possible way there was. But that's tomorrow. And tomorrow is where everything we built tonight gets put to the only test that ever mattered. To be continued. That was episode 7 of Paper Vows. If Esme and Adrian have your heart, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus scenes are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
Air mia.
Thank you for listening.